Before we convene, I'd just like to remind everyone that we are being televised and recorded by Sandwich Community Television. May we rise for the pledge, please? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, is anybody here for public comment? First public forum. Okay. Review and approval of minutes for January 16th, 2025.
Make a motion to approve the minutes of 1/16/25.
Second.
Motion by Mr. George, second by Mr. Hockter. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, it's unanimous, 4-0. Town manager report.
Couple quick updates. Next week is a busy week for night meetings. On Monday night at 5:30 is the Community Preservation Committee, and a group of 4 of us are going to go just to give an overview of what we see as some of the town's upcoming needs. And Bill's going to go over the financial aspects, and then depending on what the board decides later tonight, we may also present an application to the group related to this building, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Then Tuesday night at 6 o'clock in this room is the same presentation on the FY26 budget to the Finance Committee. And then our next regular meeting is next Thursday night at 7 here. Just 2 items to update you on. For those who aren't aware, out at Joint Base Cape Cod, as a result of all the cleanup efforts that they had through the years, mostly because of the water contamination, there's several different advisory committees and councils they have out there. It just so happens that they have several vacancies. Thankfully, most are not from Sandwich. On the 2 key committees out there, we're well represented and we're covered. But on the Science Advisory Council, they're interested. If anyone from Sandwich might be interested, please call our office at Town Hall and we can get the information. And it's online at the base's website. But if anyone has any questions, contact us at Town Hall at 888-5144 and we can steer people in the right direction. There's a lot of interesting work that goes on out there, especially if you have a science background. And then lastly, this just came in today, 2 pieces of great news. DEP approved both of our waiver requests, one for Oak Ridge School wastewater treatment plant, and then one for the Forestdale School wastewater treatment plant. When I say waivers, it's to go from the mechanical systems that they have now to basically a normal Title V system because the flows are so low. There are some very fair and normal conditions that are attached to the waiver. So, we need to analyze all that, but I think next time Dave Mason comes in with a group of us to give an update on everything we've been doing on wastewater. And there is a night with the Finance Committee, I think in February, March, we're making a presentation to them. We'll have more to update. And then we literally got the signed contracts back on the high school project. So, I know we get frustrated on the bigger picture wastewater efforts and a lot of effort without a lot of substance, but thankfully, a lot of outcome yet. But thankfully on the school issues, we're really making good progress, so it'll be nice to knock those off. And those won't happen overnight, but they'll probably happen over the next year. So it's great.
Thank you.
And that was it.
Any questions, Bud?
Is the work of the high school plan to be done during the off?
Yeah, I think technically, the way the bids went, it was 1.5 years to do the work, but most of the work will happen when kids aren't in school. So my understanding is a lot will happen this summer. They probably want to see how it functions, make some small tweaks at the winter break, and then technically they would have a little bit longer to correct things, but I think almost, a good chunk of it will be done this summer. And again, that's something Dave, we can address next time we come in with better answer.
Anybody else? Okay. Correspondence, statements, and announcements. I have a couple, if you don't mind. The Bikeways and Pedestrians Committee met on Monday night. There were updates related to Service Road Shared Use Path,
canal to service road connection. Concerns were received from the Sandwich Historical Commission on that project in particular. Crosswalk evaluation, bike rack distribution, Vision Zero high injury and high risk analysis is a work in progress. Oak Ridge School pump track, progress overall. Tuesday night, Sandwich Cares met. A presentation was made by Recovery Without Walls related to their holistic approach to recovery, enabling stability through acupuncture, meditation, and group therapies, etc. It was a very interesting session. And then last night, school committee met. The Student Advisory Committee held a public session prior to the school committee meeting. The 5 students that formed that community were enthusiastic and generally outstanding. The FY26 school operating budget was approved by the school committee, and as we related, we'll have bites on that coming forward. And that's all I have. Okay? Okay. Staff meeting. Town Manager Bud Dozen, Assistant Town Manager Heather Harper, Finance Director Bill Jennings, the FY26 budget presentation and related issues.
Thank you all for your anticipated patience as we go through this. A couple things I just want to say at the outset. This is a big team effort to get it to this point in the process, and I know Heather and I would especially like to thank Bill for all the work he's done. The 3 of us, Marie Buckner from the Human Resources Department, and our 3 financial department heads, Ben Steich, Dave Sullivan, and Caroline Burke. I think we started meeting on this in October, maybe even one meeting in September, but we've really been meeting regularly until the beginning of this month. And then over the last 3 weeks, we added about 6 or 7 more department heads that this week we were going to meet every day, but we ended up meeting 3 of the days. And so we've spent a lot of time making sure we were double checking things and trying to get things as well summarized as we could. And probably one of the main things I want to say tonight is, unfortunately, we're not at a point where we can give out the budget binders like we usually do. There's one number that is really key to our budget, and that's what's happening with our health insurance rates. And so the group that we're a member of, late last week, we found out what the average increase would be. So that's what we've used in our projections. But the fluctuation between towns that have had super good experience and towns that have had super bad experience is a full 10%. And as you'd expect, the average is right in the middle. And so that's what we've used in presenting tonight. They have to let over 100 communities know what their actual rates would be starting this week, and we haven't been told yet. So it's not out of the ordinary, but I can't tell you how many times 3 of us have been looking at our emails literally in the middle of the night, hoping we'd see something because we really wanted to have everything ready. Melissa Carroll in our office has done an incredible job with Lisa McNamara. Like, the binders are all ready. It's just, if a number that big changes, it's going to ripple through to several pages in the binder. So we really think it's best just to wait. Obviously, I'll talk about the health insurance as part of this presentation. But just as a backdrop, I wanted to say that these are the best numbers that we have today and our best projections. You can be assured that if the numbers are good, like, we know what we would do. If the numbers are bad, we know what we'll do, but we just don't know what those numbers are yet. So I'll start the presentation. So first, I'll give a quick overview. So just to cut to the chase, the recommended base budget for the general government is an increase of 3.65%. And that total includes several, but not all of the remaining FY25 and beyond priorities that we've talked about the last few years. It addresses some increasing cost centers and departmental operating budgets, many of that you have talked to me about in your own private businesses and that are basically happening in the world. So we're trying to keep our services the same, but some of the costs have gone up in some areas. And I want to stress that the 3.65% does not include an increase to the public works infrastructure to try to get us to a grand total of $2.6 million, which, if you remember, is the overall goal from the latest pavement management study that we had, which was early in 2022. So what we've been calling the optimal outcome budget that would add enough money to get us to that $2.6 million goal, which has been a priority of the board and the finance committee for literally 2 decades. We need an increase, a total increase of 6.05%. So I want to stress that the difference between the 3.65 and the 6.05 is purely that DPW number. There's no other numbers in there. So when we go through the presentation, you'll see how much money that would equate to and how we could solve the problem. But we really should revisit that once we know those other revenue and expense items, mostly from the state and our health insurance. And then another quick overview is that our capital budget is net total of just under $1.15 million, and it's all within the current projections for town meeting. Heather and Bill have worked on the capital budget separately, again, since late fall, and have done a great job getting it to this point, and we'll touch on all those things. So just a quick overview of what the presentation will focus on. I'll try to start off in the beginning with something that I know we talk about every year, just because I think if you're someone watching from home or aren't familiar, it is interesting to see where our money comes from and where it goes in the simplest way to show it. I'll briefly explain what's going to be included in the budget binders that we'll hand out next week. Give a quick overview of that financial database, which I know we've talked about in years past. There's probably 30 years of information there, and we highlight the last 5. But talk about that, what's recommended in the capital budget for next year, what's recommended in more detail for the general government operating budget. Talk a little bit about that DPW public infrastructure goal, and then just talk at the end about some overall trends that we've been seeing in the world, not just in Sandwich or in Massachusetts, but also give you an update on those FY25 and beyond efforts that, we're so thankful for, that the board and the Public and Finance Committee supported those last year. So just a really quick look at where our money comes from and goes. This chart shows you that, just under 80% of our income comes from taxes. We get another 11% from state aid, the vast majority of that being, almost an $8 million direct payment to the school department for Chapter 70 funds. Local receipts, or all the monies we bring in for motor vehicle excise payments, are by far the largest portion of that. Also includes any fees that we'd bring in from departments that are not in enterprise funds or revolving funds. And then surplus revenue is also known as our free cash. So that's sort of a quick indication of money that we were certified when we closed our books last year, how much was left over between what we thought we'd spend and what we actually spent. And then there's our super small part made up of other sources. And so that's where our money comes from. Here's a quick look on where it goes. I know it's probably hard to read, but tried to break this up into educational operating expenses, general government operating expenses, our state and county assessments. Probably the biggest one there is our charter tuition assessments, our employee-related costs, which is mostly health, dental, retirement expenses. So we're going to touch on that later because that's a part of the budget that's growing over time. Our debt, which is the different large capital projects that the public has supported through the years as we pay off, just like you would a mortgage, over time. Our reserve funds, which is money that we set aside in case something goes wrong. And then our capital purchases, which again we'll highlight in a second. So again, these are sort of broken up from a bigger picture. So if you tried to boil it down to the simplest way of just education, general government, our debt, and a few small general costs. If someone asked, looked at our total budget, including our employee costs, our everything, it would show you, roughly 62 cents on the dollar goes towards educational efforts, 32 cents for general government, about 4 cents on the dollar for debt, and another 2% for some general costs that really couldn't be classified either of those ways. And I want to stress when I go to the next slide, this is just operating budgets, has nothing to do with employee costs or debt or anything, just our operating budgets. If you're interested to see, roughly 60% goes to the school locally, a 5% to Upper Cape Tech. And then interestingly, police and fire are right around, 7 and 9% respectively. And I want to stress this is net for fire. We transferred $2 million from the ambulance fund. So if that $2 million wasn't transferred and we had to cover it, they'd probably be closer to 10%. They'd be bigger than fire. And then DPW is about 5.5%. Libraries 1.5%. And literally there's over 20 other departments that make up that 12%. So there a lot of small departments that probably aren't as evident to the public, but it's really if those small departments didn't do their work, those bigger departments wouldn't be able to open. So next I just want to talk briefly on what's in the invisible budget binders that you don't have in front of you, but that you've seen many times. I won't spend too much time on these, but we have the presentation that we're going through tonight and some summary documents. Tab 2 reflects our overall budget summary and backup material. Tab 3 is our financial database, which again I'll touch on in a second. Tab 4 is our capital budget. 5 is our general government budget, where all the detail is, every person's name, salary to the dollar, all of our operating expenses, historic trends, etc. School department can go in tab 4. 7 is Upper Cape Tech. 8 is just some additional budget information that we thought you'd be interested in, and then we'll also get everyone a thumb drive. And I really want to stress that as soon as those budget binders are given out to the board and to the finance committee, the entire binder, every page will be on the town's website with a direct link on our homepage, so people at home would have the same exact information that I have in my binder and that Charlie has in his. So again, not to dwell on this, but the summary material will include the budget presentation. And I think when we go through the presentation, it's actually going to be pages 43 and 44. It's that one-page summary of the overall budget that'll literally be in every select board and finance committee packet between now and when we go to town meeting in May. You'll see that there's going to be 2 options that we highlight, one with the 3.65% and one if that we're able to accomplish the DPW infrastructure to get us to 6.05%. I plan to include each of those in every week. And then some of our departmental operating budgets as well. Tab 2 is some overall material, similar to the format that we used last year, the last 2 years actually. And Bill's done a great job. That one page that we're most familiar with electronically, if you click on any of those numbers, there's a link that brings you to the historic backup on how we came up with those numbers. It's really well done. It's very user friendly, and again, the public can access that from home once we get it up on the website. So those embedded links are all there, and as always, we'll update that as things change throughout the budget process. Our financial database, again, I'm not going to dwell on everything, but really, if anyone asks me what's the best way to learn about a municipal budget and sort of all the demographic information that drives the numbers and how our financials are put together, what makes up the town budget, what reserves do we have, it really is a great resource. If people looked at it a couple times, they would have such a more fuller understanding of how municipal financial operations work. The general format's been unchanged. We did streamline a little bit, got rid of some tabs that didn't make worksheets that didn't make sense, added a few others. And again, it has over 25 years of historic data in there, but the documentation focuses on the last 5 years. Tab 4 is our capital budget, and I know we'll be going over this in more detail with both the select board and the finance committee in the ensuing weeks. But the net recommended amount, as I said earlier, is just under 1.15 million. There's a continued commitment within that to annually fund at least $150,000 for the facilities departments in both the town and the school for maintenance efforts. And then there's some primary focus areas that make up the difference. There's another $425,000 for school department capital needs. There's some police and fire vehicle replacements that are just over $135,000. We've talked about setting up a small appropriation for emergency management of $50,000. That would be a capital account that would stay there. I think the board's familiar when a storm hits, we're allowed to spend money that we have on hand that might not be allocated for a specific purpose during the emergency, but this would help just give us a little bit of flexibility. And I think, as the board knows as well, if it's a big if FEMA or MEMA end up reimbursing us for some of those costs, we typically don't see it for at least 3 or 4 years. So we have to upfront some of those costs. And then lastly, some voting machine replacements are another one of the bigger items. There's several smaller items as well. Just the general government operating budget. We have all of the budget totals by departmental account. And you're going to hear me say this next part several times. The base budget is 3.65% increase over FY25. We're adding a few additional FY25 and beyond priorities. Really, the main thing that I think we want to focus on, because Bill's been using the phrase, which I think is spot on, our base operating budget is very vanilla. There's not a lot of new things there. There are some costs that we'll touch on in a second that have gone up for everyone that we're trying to stay ahead of. But really, the difference between that 3.65 and 6.05 is a $560,000 appropriation to the DPW for public infrastructure that would bring us to the $2.6 million that we've been trying to get to for decades. So I'll show you that in a second. So that's really an optimal outcome budget. We realize that that's our goal. We can't fund it without knowing some of those other line items that we're still waiting on. And so as those numbers become clear, I think it's something we need to revisit and talk about where we could find the funding if needed, and we'll show you that. And then one thing I want to stress that I think all of us, all the department heads take pride in is that we're always trying to think of new ways to provide services or address problems. We're open-minded to that. We try to take advantage of reorganizational opportunities when they're presented, as long as we had the right amount of funds to implement them. And I think something we've noticed for many, many years, like our HR department goes above and beyond. Anytime any position becomes open, we take a look at the job description. How could we rewrite it? Should it report somewhere else? How can we improve it? And I think that's something that we constantly look at anytime a position becomes open. And then really quickly, the last few tabs of our budget, the school department budget, when we received that from them. Upper Cape Tech, I'll talk about it in a minute, but Roger Forget from Upper Cape Tech, as soon as the governor's budget was known, by law, that's what their budget's predicated upon and based on. So he called me Monday already with the number, so we'll get to that in a few minutes. So we really appreciate them tipping us off early on. A very modest increase this year. And then miscellaneous information, there's some information on cherry sheets, our debt schedule, our FY25 and beyond handouts that we went through several years. And then I put in a little bit more information on health insurance, because you're going to hear that that's an increase that is happening everywhere, but it's really significant, and it's impacting our budgets a lot. And then, similar to what's on the website, anything in your budget we'll have on a thumb drive, so if you ever wanted to look at stuff at home on your computers, you could do that. And again, I talk a lot during this, so if there's any questions or if I'm going too fast or slow, let me know. Just some quick highlights of our general government operating budget on significant changes. I think these are really important. So this is all within our base budget at 3.65%, meaning we've addressed it within that number. You'll recall that Brian Schlegel from the Facilities Department went before the Finance Committee, and I know several board members were there last June, to go through all the repair work and maintenance work that he's done for the last many years. And, he was asked prior to the meeting, how much more would you ideally want in your operating budget so you could stay ahead of the smaller things, knowing full well if some bigger building issue happens, that requires a lot more money than would be in an operating budget. And the amount he mentioned was $60,000. So this budget includes $60,000 in his budget to get him to that number. We've added some money in both the IT departments and in the tree warden program to give them more capability to either plant more trees, because we've been really successful doing that lately, but also, especially in IT, I think we all recognize how fast technology changes. Generally, the cost of software and annual licensing fees for software tends to go up each year. We try to stay on top of things as best we can, but to give Mike Toomey and his crew a little bit more flexibility would really help out all our departments, so we've added some money there. There's two long-standing positions that we've wanted to address for a while, and I stress that the amount of money that we're putting in is not enough to just do these positions, but it could be coupled with some existing funds when vacancies exist, or there's an ability to address these two needs. And one is an assistant library director position, and the second is like a part-time position to help with grants and communication issues. It's something that we were talking with some of our colleagues recently, and a lot of people said, like, if you were starting a town from scratch in a modern world, we'd all have a communication department, which really none of us have except for Barnstable, and they have like a hefty one. But, it's the type of thing that, as things change over time, we're just trying to keep up with some of the demands that we have. There's some really significant increases that I want to highlight in the police, fire, and DPW budgets. Probably the best example is our DPW vehicle replacement. And I know two of you have talked to me regularly about how it's impacting your private businesses. What Paul Tilton used to be able to buy for $150,000 is literally now over $350,000 for the same vehicle, and you're having to wait almost a year for it to be available. So we've added $200,000 to his lease purchase of equipment account in his budget to try to give him the ability and flexibility to keep moving forward on those. Similarly, our expenses for our cruiser replacements, the state bid, and all these are off low state bids, so we're able to buy equipment much less than the private sector can, but we oftentimes have to wait for it. So this includes more money in the police department so they can keep replacing 4 of their primary cruisers each year. Those cruisers don't even come close to lasting 5 years, so they don't even meet the definition of what we traditionally have said as capital. And then fire's had some expenses as well that we're trying to keep up with. Just for comparison purposes, in police and fire, the fire number is just under 100,000, the police number is just over 100,000. They needed just to keep things the same. This is something we talked about at the special town meeting a few weeks ago. We set up that revolving account for short-term rental inspections. Leanne Drake has been working with the planning board, and town council has met with Heather and I this week. So we have a proposed town bylaw for short-term rentals that'll be coming before the board in a public hearing later this spring, and it'll be presented to town meeting so we can update you on that. So I think you're all aware with a revolving fund, you have to upfront the cost the first year, and then once those fees come in, it pays for those expenses, so we don't have to appropriate the money next year. So we're appropriating about $50,000 towards this for next year. That $50,000 will go away next year. And then just it incorporates many of the reorganizational efficiencies and savings that we talked about last year with the FY25 and beyond, and that we've been able to realize being in one building, most of us at 100 Route 6A, instead of spread out in 4 or 5 buildings. So that's the 3.65% budget. The optimal outcome budget at 6.05%. Again, the only thing that's different is it adds $560,000 to the DPW budget for public infrastructure funding. That, coupled with our state funds, which I have a slide coming up that will show all this, gets us to the long-stated goal of $2.6 million annually to try to avoid needing a road bond in the future, knowing full well that road expenses go up over time. But it's the first time we've ever gotten close to this, and to think that we're being able to do it possibly within our operating budget without having to go for capital expenses or rely on others, it's sort of surprising we've been able to come this far through a long-term effort to try to get us to this goal. And I really think you'll see the numbers on this a little bit later, but it really is going to boil down to a primary policy decision from the board is, do you want to use that excess levy capacity to the tune of about $500,000, which it might be less if other numbers come in better over the next few weeks and months, to try to address that recurring need. And then I want to also highlight that it sounds good to say all these things on expenses that we're trying to keep up with and that we're funding, but I want to stress that we're also always trying to look for ways to offset some of those costs and expenses. So I know last year the board, and especially Chief Miller, was rightfully concerned about counting on a donation fund from a business for the purpose of the school resource officer positions, but not having the money in our account. And so we've been speaking with that business owner who was interested in making that donation, and 2 weeks ago gave us a check for $200,000, which they plan to have as an annual contribution to fund our two school resource officer positions. And that's from In Good Health, to try to make it more formal, but also realizing that it's a donation agreement that, you know, for some reason they decide they can't no longer do that. We would want to include some provisions Bill and I have talked about giving us at least a year's notice before the next budget goes into effect, so we can try to make up those differences. And so they've agreed to that as well. So we are going to have to update our host community agreement, and ideally if we could do that by March 15th. We've been working with town council on that, and I would think at one of your meetings in February we'll bring that back to you to look at. Ambulance fund has been doing really well bringing in money. Bill and Caroline were able to look at those receipts with Chief Burke, and everyone was very comfortable by increasing that transfer another 100,000 to, I think, roughly 2.1 million. So again, the fire department budget would be $2.1 million higher if we weren't transferring those funds. So it's good to offset some of those expenses. And then lastly, the Weston Fund, which is a separately elected group that invests some library endowments, has really been doing well. So they approached us and asked us to consider, which we gladly accepted, was they would be willing to give a little more because they've been making very good returns on their investments. The board's familiar. We have 4 enterprise funds in town that aren't funded through the general fund. So those are our cable licensing fees, which help support and operate Sandwich Community Television, our transfer station, Sandwich Hollows Golf Course, and Sandwich Marina. So just generalizing, there's no significant changes in any 4 of those budgets. The operations are all very similar. Did want to highlight that at Sandwich Hollows, this will be the 3rd year of them paying for their debt on their irrigation and equipment project internally, and they've been having, they've continued those really good receipts since COVID, and they haven't had an issue coming, they haven't had a concern at all about paying those costs. So it's a big thing we wanted to highlight. So just quickly, I want to look back and say thank you for a second, and that's our FY25 and beyond effort for municipal modernization and efficiency. If you recall, our whole goal was to try to modernize and organize Sandwich structurally for better long-term success and flexibility. We'll look at the list of positions and efforts in a second, but we made a big whack at that last year thanks to the board's support, the finance committee support, and the public support. It's been really successful. So a majority of our long-term capital and municipal building needs have already been addressed. I think, at least on the town side, we feel if we can get the public support for that DPW facility and fire substation to be relocated from downtown, I honestly can't think of a major new municipal building that we will need for many decades. It's fair to say that the schools need some attention, which we'll talk about in a second. And the other big thing that we wanted to stress about our modernization plan is it gave us operational flexibility. It properly organized us internally. It's helped us a little bit with recruitment and retention, where many other towns have been having some problems with that. And it also has enabled us to take advantage of some regional efficiencies, which I'll touch on. So this next 2 slides, I think, are really important. It's something that the board has voted. It's printed in the back of the warrant every year, but I think we see it so much, or maybe it's out there so much we don't really look at it, and I thought it would make sense if we highlighted it. As voted by the select board, our vision is that we're going to strive to meet the evolving public and community needs, by enhancing our long-term operational and physical investments in the areas of public and community services, public and environmental health, public and school safety, public works, and the financial capacity and flexibility to improve and innovate our local services. And I think a lot of what we implemented last year addressed all 5 of those areas. And we want to carry it a little bit further this upcoming year, and you'll see when I get to that slide, there's not a lot more for us to do. And I think one of the other things that I think talks about how, for lack of a better word, we should behave, all of us as local public officials, and that's our guiding principles, again, that the board helped establish, that we're going to foster the greater public good through respect, cooperation, kindness, integrity, and professionalism, that we're looking at responsible financial stewardship to help inform our decision making for both operational and physical improvements, and trying to pay it forward for future generations. I think if you look at those 5 or 6 building projects we did over the last decade, I don't think any of us would have realized how much the Cal building would have been used, how much the skate parks used, how much more efficient local operations are at 100 Route 6A than in the other buildings that we were in. One of the other guiding principles is appropriate staffing takes precedent over capital assets, that innovation and efficiency must be considered when we add or modify infrastructure, staff, or services, and to trying to deliver a superior level of public service should always be a desired outcome. And I think that's something that we've literally developed through Guy Boucher, a laminated thing that's hopefully on every employee's desk. It's on mine. Every employee has it, that says these things on the last 2 slides, for us to remember that should help us guide our work every day. So here's a really quick look. I won't go through every one of what the Select Board and Finance Committee and Public at Town Meeting supported. We have made so much hay with this list of positions and services, and we will definitely be back to both the board and the Finance Committee later this spring before we finalize the budget, just to give you a presentation on those impacts. A couple things I thought I'd highlight, and I'm probably going to screw up some of the numbers. The Cal building has been averaging over 600 people using the Cal building at night. The walking track has averaged over 150 people a day, to the extent that it's been so full they've asked us for more lanes, which we can't do. But some people have even asked, can we walk around the gym, because there's so many people using those facilities. Our social worker that's been housed in the police department but helping all departments is starting this week or next 2 different 2-hour stints at the Center for Active Living for anyone in the public to be able to come visit them, talk to them about anything. We've gotten regular reports on all the outreach, so that those positions are really doing what they wanted. I asked Chief Keene at a staff meeting earlier this week how the extra officers on the 4 to midnight shift, and the board's familiar. When we hire someone, it's really a full year before they're actually able to go out on the road, because they have to go to the academy, then the local training. So he hasn't been able to implement all the way up to those 3 people, but we're getting closer for them coming back out of the academy. So there's a lot of good things that we accomplished last year. So here's a look about what we still want to accomplish. So the items that are listed for FY26, every one of those is either in the base budget or forms the foundation in the sense of the DPW infrastructure, the optimal outcome budget. And then there's a couple things that we've put off for FY27. One, because we think we're going to be able to find a way to manage things internally so we wouldn't need the position. And another hasn't proven a need yet in the fire department. And I think the wastewater positions that we talked about, like those could be funded through the WIF, or once we have sewering and fees rolling in. So those wouldn't or shouldn't come from taxes, but we're still a ways out from needing that. But I just want to keep those last 2-3 things on the radar, just because we shouldn't forget about them down the road. There's 2 things I really want to take time to highlight. We touched on them last year. And those are, we have some known significant upcoming savings headed our way. And these aren't, paper savings. These are actual savings where you should see a reduction in budgets. And the first one is the effort that the board supported. So we have a signed intermunicipal agreement between Barnstable, Yarmouth, and Sandwich for the 3 towns to work together on a regional dispatch operation. As it sits right now, we're in our second state 911 grant. And so this grant is taking it all the way to designing a building and getting it ready for construction plans and design. Phase 3 would be funding the actual construction of a building. My understanding from Chief Burke, who's been our primary liaison to this effort, is that there's a hope that we'll be ready, get the 3rd grant, and ground could be broken in Barnstable right behind the existing police station in Barnstable. Is it Bierce's Way, I think, or is that what it is? Right behind the police station there, potentially as early as this August. In a perfect world, this would be implemented in calendar year 27. So I just want to be clear, if it's the last half of calendar year 27, that's our fiscal year 28. It's probably not going to be, I doubt that the switch will flip right on July 1st. So really the first full fiscal year where you'd see the full impact would be FY29. So I just want people to know that. But the consultant's report was estimating net projected annual savings of $700,000. And when I say net savings, that's after we keep 5 dispatchers locally to address our local communications between the police station, the cruisers, and to allow our police station to be open to the public 24/7 if they ever have to stop there in the middle of the night. So that's huge. And then I don't want people to forget that our final payment for the Sandwich Hollows acquisition for the golf course portion expires in FY30, so it's been 30 years, and that's been being paid within our Proposition 2.5 levy limit. So as soon as that last bill's paid, the next fiscal year, we will have a known savings of $400,000. So probably within 2 fiscal years of each other, we will free up about $1.1 million that I'm sure the people who will be looking at what they do then, what do we do then, we should be able to look at, decreasing some actual costs and freeing up some funds to address the other needs, or not to raise it. So next I wanted to highlight, and I think this issue came up at the special town meeting a few weeks ago, just some of the long-term prioritized capital needs that we've been very upfront about, but I want to continue to be upfront with the public. And I know the board's well aware of these because we've been talking about them for quite a while. But the first is our DPW facilities and our fire substation upgrade for the downtown area, and that would be housed on the current DPW site. We've made a lot of progress over the last year. There have been significant issues involving the site layout there and challenges that our consultants have been able to address. There was the update that was given to the board a few weeks ago. So right now it's still based on that conceptual design, trying to get cost estimates that we'll start making more public once we get those. That should be later in February. Obviously, a project that large, the only way you could fund that would be through a debt exclusion. I'm sure there'll be a lot of talk with the board and the finance committee and with the group that's been working on those projects as one project for the last literally 3 years. So we'll keep moving on that. Wastewater appropriations, which was a focus of the recent special town meeting. So voters did support asking themselves, so they haven't committed to it yet, but asking themselves at the May annual election to increase our WIF surcharge from 2% to 3%. There's been some work that the board's familiar with about the state revolving fund on low interest loans for qualified work. And most importantly, which we highlighted at the special, was the Cape and Islands Water Protection Fund that will give us 25% principal relief. Those funds didn't exist when we adopted our CWRMP in 2018. There's other ways to pay for it from user fees and assessments, but there's no doubt that the volume of money that's going to be needed to build what we need to build, which is significantly less than what most other towns are having to build, will require debt exclusions in the future. And we're really trying to focus on working with our neighbors, especially Joint Base Cape Cod, just from that whole concept of strength in numbers. And if you work on it together, it'll cost you less than if you did it by yourself. There's some large-scale capital needs that we've talked about, especially with the school committee at our joint meeting at the beginning of December. A school department focus where it's pretty clear that the current debt exclusion that we had to do some repairs there is not going to be sufficient enough, and there's some other significant needs that need to be looked at. We're still working on trying to determine how to retain a cost estimating firm at a reasonable price to analyze those building systems. We would also analyze the municipal buildings, but it's fair to say most of those plans would be for maintenance goals down the road, not for significant work, because we've made a lot of progress the last 10 years to get to where we are today. And then lastly, I just wanted to touch on some Community Preservation Act appropriations. I know this is something that the Finance Committee's talked a lot about the last 5 years, and that's if there's ways that we can identify some of our capital improvement plan needs through the CPA. It's something we should look at, and we're going to talk about one of these a little bit later tonight, and that's the town hall restoration on the replacing the windows and a few other items. We've talked about some recreation department resurfacing. If you've ever noticed that the basketball courts down at Oak Crest Cove that get constant use, the relatively small cost items, but those are the type of things that maybe some CPA money would help us out. And there's been also some talk about the Sandwich Middle High School fields and how do we maintain them, for the future, but also a couple of other needs out there that need to be looked at. I think one of the things that the board has talked about a little bit is someday do we look at potentially increasing that surcharge. If you look at the list of what we've been able to fund the last many decades, which is actually going to be part of our meeting with the CPC next Monday, a lot of those things are what, in my opinion, what makes Sandwich. Some of those open space purchases are incredible walking trails. I mean, look at those recreational assets that we've been able to do and how much people have used them. Some of the affordable housing projects we've been able to support. I mean, look what's happening at the Wing School. It's awesome. So now I want to talk about sort of the concept, like when things are difficult, you should always look in the mirror first. So this is sort of a look in the mirror about like what are some of the items that I think have either caused us the most headaches or will cause us the most headaches collectively heading into the future. So the first item, which we've talked about every year, and I used to include 2 graphs, and I'm like, you've seen those graphs 100 times, I'm taking them out. So that's tuition assessments. And I don't know, again, if the general public still understands this, but when a student from Sandwich decides to go to a public charter school or to another public school, the town actually gets charged for that, not the school. The town gets charged for that, and it comes right off the top of our budget. So believe it or not, that total assessments for this past year that we're in now, or current year, is $5 million. And I think people have lost sight of that. It's $1.5 million more than what our Upper Cape Tech assessment is. And that's something that we can relate to more because it's a building we see. A lot of our kids go there. And it's not second guessing or faulting people who rightfully choose a public school option of their choice. But I think what people don't understand is how much that's impacted us. So since its inception, and when it was first conceived, the school department used to be charged for the costs. And then the state changed the regulations so the towns would pay, not the schools. So since that change has taken place, and this is staggering, annually, it's been over an 80% increase on average, if you look at it. And I want to stress, but there's been a significantly less impact over the last 5 years. None of the last 5 years have been over 5%. Last year was actually a slight decrease. But even with those lower numbers, if you annualized it since the beginning to today, it's been over 80% a year. And here's, I think, some staggering demographic numbers. And it's, when I say staggering, it's nothing against the school. It's just a fact of life on Cape Cod when you look at all the school enrollments. Our local enrollment has decreased by 55% from our peak in 2002. Today, 35% of K through 12 students seek non-Sandwich educational opportunities. So that impacts both the charter and tuition assessments. That also includes people going to private schools that we don't pay for. But in total, 35% of the school-age kids in Sandwich go somewhere else for school. And I think that's a lot different than it was 20 years ago. Some of these options didn't exist then. So again, it's Nothing against the school, it's just factual demographics, but it's really impacted our budgets. The next big issue that I think we need to be aware of is our capital and maintenance needs. Can't thank the board and the public enough for all the investments and maintenance that we've done over the last decade. I know if he was here, I think Chief Miller would be most proud of this, but like public safety buildings, the debt exclusion, the public roads and infrastructure debt exclusion, the library renovations and Center for Active Living, all that was done within Proposition 2.5. Our 100 Route 6A improvements and the purchase was all paid in full without any debt. Our school building improvements, debt exclusion, the boardwalk project, the Section 111 project, increased operating budget for the facilities department, like all those things have helped us address it. But it's fair to say we still have more to do, which we're aware of, especially for the schools. If you look back at our annual capital budgets 15 years ago compared to today, we've really done a good job looking at those needs more, and I know that's been a huge priority of both the Finance Committee and the Select Board, so thank you for that. The next one is probably the most important thing to highlight for this fiscal year, and that's our employee-related costs and liability issues. So there's been significant increases in the cost to provide employee benefits and our liability programs. So we've had excellent health insurance cost control measures and results when we moved to Maya, which is the company that we have 5+ years ago. But it's fair to say some of the national trends are catching up with us this year, which I'll talk about in a second. Our rates for FY26 are going to be high. As I said, the first thing tonight, we don't have the final rates yet. The average increase on health insurance rates, so it's on medical insurance rates, for our group is going to be 14.8%. And like I said, that's going to range anywhere for each town between 9 and 19%. We haven't been given what our number is going to be yet. Dental rates are significantly less, about 6%. And if you remember our retirement assessments, they've fluctuated significantly. It's a very reasonable number for FY26, under 4%. But if you look at I think 3 or 4 of our last 5 years have been over 10. So those are costs that are somewhat beyond our control that we have to pay. And it's just something to be aware of as we move forward, that most likely the way the national trends are, it's not going to change. It's probably going to get worse. For the, I think, 12th year in a row, we're making appropriations to our OPEB trust fund, but our overall liability is over $128 million. It's not atypical. The state number is staggering, so we're trying to address those as best we can. But I think it's fair to say it's prudent to keep putting the funds in that account in hopes that it might help us get to a AAA bond rating. We're at a AA+. It's insured, so when it gets issued, it gets looked at as if it was a AAA, but we still want to get to a AAA. So this next slide is probably the main reason you didn't have stuff in your packet. So if you look at our 2.5% increase for FY26, not including new growth, just the 2.5% increase, 91% of that is going to go towards health insurance and retirement increases based on what we know of the rates right now, even though we haven't gotten our final ones. So those increases for next year are about 1.8 million, and our total Proposition 2.5% increase townwide is about 2 million. So it doesn't leave much money to address all those other things I talked about, where cost centers are going up, or contracts with teachers, or with firefighters, or with administrative professionals, so we're always trying to do that balancing act. And so one of our big concerns is, what if those health insurance and retirement trends continue? Most years it's closer to 50%, not 91%. But what if those trends continue? That's not sustainable without touching that excess levy capacity. It's pretty rare to have, and we've had it for several years now. But I think we should be very thankful that we've set that money aside in the sense of not ever spending it, so it hasn't impacted people's taxes, but we have ability to raise it with their support. Thank goodness we've set that aside, because if this trend continues and you don't know if it's a 1-year blip, is it going to be a 5-year trend, it's a national problem, not just a Sandwich problem or a Massachusetts or even a public sector, private sector thing. We're all seeing it. So one of the questions that I've had is like, would the state ever consider some creative ways to address those estimates? And this is like an outside of the box thing that we floated with some of the higher ups that we interact with at the state level. And that's, what if health insurance increases were exempt from 2.5? The weird thing with that, our OPEB liability would go to zero. The state's OPEB liability would go to zero. It will never happen politically, ever. I mean, it's an idea, trying to think outside the box, but I just wanted to use that as an example of, and not to, trying to think of the best way to say it. We're also prevented from making plan design changes by state law without negotiating it with all the bargaining units in town, which is really difficult. And people often ask why, and it's like we operate under different rules than the private sector does, and it's really hard to stay ahead of some of these things. So here are the key reasons, and I thought the board, in light of that large increase, would find these really interesting. And I think when I talk through them, like we're all going to say, oh, of course, I've been experiencing that personally, or, I've been seeing this happen. So without a doubt, since COVID, there's been a much greater increase utilizing healthcare services, especially mental health services and surgical procedures. There's been a significant increase in usage. There's also been an increased use, and if you think about it, physically, the actual number of urgent care facilities. Think of how many urgent care facilities are on Cape Cod. We were fortunate that we had the Stoneman Center before almost all the other things down Cape. And how many of us, when something goes wrong, you go to the urgent care facility, not to your primary care, because you can't get an appointment with your primary care, or you try to switch a primary care doctor and they say, oh, we'll put you on a list for the next 2 years. So, you can see these things happening in all of our daily lives, and all these things, in fact, affect insurance rates. Medical labor shortages have led to much higher labor costs, especially at prominent hospitals, of which Massachusetts, thankfully, has some of the best in the world. Prescription drug costs are rising at double-digit paces, and I thought this was really interesting at the meeting we were at last week, especially the use of the GLP-1 medications, Ozempic, Wegovy. What the people in the know told us are those are expensive drugs, but they're also very popular. Most of the time, popular drugs aren't as expensive, but because these are so cutting edge and maybe the benefits of them haven't been witnessed yet, it's estimated that nationally that's impacting health insurance rates by 2 to 4% right now. It's pretty amazing. And then lastly, and this is the indication of this is a national problem. The Medicare and Medicaid payments and reimbursements to hospitals and providers are significantly underfunded at the national level. So that's caused us to increase charges to our insurers and to the end users. So again, I just wanted to point those out because people might say, why are costs going up so much? We haven't had a horrible year. The whole country's had a horrible year. And, we're experiencing that just like everyone else. Hopefully it's a blip, not a trend. And then one last cautionary tale I want to say, it's something that we should really be careful of, and that's issuing debt with inside Proposition 2.5. It's extremely rare to have that kind of debt, and we have a significant amount of it. As I mentioned earlier, once we get past the Sandwich Hollows open space purchase, where the golf course is physically located upon, not the open space next to it, which was bought with Cape Cod Land Bank funds, that actually is going to expire in FY30, so that will free up $400,000 a year, which is great. But don't forget, we also issued the library renovation debt and the new Center for Active Living within 2.5. That doesn't expire till FY51. Don't know where any of us will be in FY51, but whoever's here, it's going to free up almost $1 million. So say thank you. And how do I say this? No one would dispute how awesome the library came out, how well it's utilized, and the same thing for the Center for Active Living. That building, I think, is a model for multi-generational building that gets used all the time. So I would strongly recommend, in the future, if we have to issue any debt, do it outside of 2.5 through a debt exclusion. That's how large capital projects should be paid for. All right, I swear I'm getting closer to the end. So next I wanted to touch on our projected general fund revenues and expenses what line items and issues we need to monitor for the next few months, and then just reiterate what the overall budget recommendation is. So it's fair to say, since we talked about this in the fall, and especially at our early December meeting with the Finance Committee and School Committee, changes have happened. We've accounted for those. Unfortunately, our health insurance increases was bad information. Thankfully, the recommended general government and school operating budget, I think, are at very manageable numbers, which is good. And we've also retained transfers to our stabilization and OPEB trust fund. Probably not as much as we'd like, but we still retained them, so that's all good. And there are several budget accounts that are outside of our control that we're waiting for greater clarification. So here's the one-page overall look at our budget. This is one of the 2 pages that will be in your packets every week between now and town meeting. It shows a balanced budget. It shows the base general government budget. It shows the school budget, the number that we were given that they were recommending to the school committee that I believe got voted last night. It shows the Upper Cape Tech budget based on their final, what they assume will be their final numbers based on a call that I got on Monday. Their committee won't vote their final budget till March, but it's very reasonable at 2.53%. We only went up 5 students last year, so it's very good. I won't spend a lot of time going through all the line items, but basically revenues are on the left, expenses are on the right. Municipal finance one-on-one. Always underestimate your revenues, always overestimate your expenses, and make sure you have a positive balance. That's how we all stay solvent. We've been around since 1637. I don't think we're going to go out of business next year, but there's some things that I think on the horizon that I already touched on that we need to be careful about moving forward. But by the same token, this is a really good budget. We have the money to do it. We still have an excess levy reserve based on the base budget of $3.25 million. We still have a lot more information we need to receive from the state before we can hang our hat on any of their numbers. But I think Bill and I, who look at this the closest, feel very comfortable with the numbers based on what we know today. So I would say the reason we were so hesitant to give you the budget binders is if we find out before our meeting next Thursday that those medical rates that were going to go up 14.8 are now going to go up, I'm making this up, 18%, what each percent is about $100,000 that we'd have to come up with. And so that will change what this looks like. Once we change this main page, in your budget binder, it probably changes 20 other pages, which is why I didn't want to give it out to you tonight. But if we hear tomorrow or before your meeting next Thursday that the increase is going to be very similar to what we had planned on here, we should be good to go. We can get you those binders immediately and the Finance Committee. Any questions on this page before I turn the page? So I think this is really interesting. So this adds the DPW infrastructure goal. So it's our optimal outcome budget. So the only thing that changes on the expense side, if you look at the bottom right, is the general government budget would go to 3.65% to 6.05%. We'd save $100,000 by, knock on wood, our snow and ice deficit, we're doing well this year. But really, if you just took the excess levy reserve, we'd still have $2.75 million there, and you could implement that change. I'm going to talk a little bit about the DPW infrastructure goal and why it's so important. I just wanted to show you that if all the other numbers stay the same, or if a few go in our favor, as Bill's been saying, maybe we can save $250,000 from our tuition assessments, but we would take $250,000 less from excess levy reserve, you'd still be at $3 million. I mean, we haven't talked about it in a lot of detail, but I know how important through the years trying to get DPW to that $2.6 million number has been. That would be, in my opinion, a really wise trade-off long-term. So here's a little bit more about that DPW goal. So literally it dates back, and Patrick will remember better than me, but the board talked about road bonds, and at one year, remember, we were going to do capital outlay expenditure inclusions, $1.3 million a year for 5 consecutive years. We asked the first year, it passed. We didn't ask the second. We asked the third, it failed, and then we had to do a road bond because we sort of lost traction. So what our pavement management plan has indicated, and that was dated early 2022, that if we could get to $2.6 million in annual funding from the state funds we receive and from our local funds, if we had that annually and kept up as cost went up, we should be able to avoid having to do a road bond, and DPW would get a lot more maintenance done. So I just wanted to show you what our annual overall funding is. So from our state Chapter 90 funds, which haven't fluctuated much at all, it's about $775,000 annually. You'll recall 2 years ago, the state started a state fair share program, the so-called millionaire's tax, where a portion of that was supposed to go back to towns for their roads. So the first year we got that $443,000. I want to be up front. For the year we're in now, less receipts came in to the state, and it dropped to a hair under $200,000. Our understanding is receipts for this year are well ahead of what they were last year. So that number of all those, I would say, is most in flux. But it's a help, but that will probably change annually. And then because of the support that the board did, if you remember, 2 years ago we added $650,000 to Paul's budget to help with maintenance. That's all the way up to $825,000 a year now. If you add those three line items up, you're at a total infrastructure funding of just under $2,050,000. We want to get to $2.6 million. We're short $560,000. So that's how we came up with the $560,000 number. That's the sole difference between the 3.65% and the 6.05%. And one of the best parts about it, if you look at where those monies are coming from, and Patrick's aware of this, like any money we get from the state, that doesn't disappear at the end of the fiscal year. We can let it build up to do a big project like the Quaker Meeting House Route 130 intersection, which we just completed, like the Quaker Meeting House Katuitt Road intersection we want to complete. So if you look at those numbers, if we were able to add the 560 to Paul's budget, it's almost a 50-50 split between capital and operating, which I think is a decent balance. So he can count on certain things to get done every year. But if we have a big project, we can let those funds accumulate and address bigger things. So I'm almost done, I promise. So what accounts and issues do we need to look out for the next 2 to 3 months? Our local aid receipts, several months to go, local aid assessments, with our biggest concern being tuition assessments. We do have the enrollment figures that were submitted to the state, and they're actually down a little bit for charter schools. So hopefully there won't be a big increase, which is why we were comfortable on that one-page summary to go to a 2% increase. So we're hopeful that will come to pass. The final cherry sheets, as the board knows better than anyone, won't be determined until several months after we voted at town meeting. Our health, property, and liability insurance costs, and I should have stressed earlier, great, as bad news as there was on medical and dental, especially medical, great news on liability, workers' comp. On average, we're going up 1%. So that's great. And we get a 2.5% discount if we pay early in the fiscal year. And then lastly, the Upper Cape budget estimate, we were told what the number would be, but they still have to take a formal vote. Like I said, our enrollment's up slightly, only 5 students. Typically, Dr. Forget doesn't give a number unless they're confident with it, and so I'm pretty assured with the number we were given. So again, just wrapping up, our administrative team we'll always provide appropriate recommendations if our estimates need to change or up or down. We always have contingency plans in our mind. Bill and I have already said, as soon as we hear what those numbers are, even if it's the worst case, we can resolve it in 15 minutes because we've thought about it, but we still need to resolve it. And then share it. So just a reminder, broken record, we have several months to go before the budget's finalized, but things are looking good. Our estimated revenues and expenses will change regularly, so I'll update those at every select board and finance committee meeting. Really important, this is our 21st fiscal year without an override request. Despite significant increases in those 21 years of tuition assessments, employee-related costs, some operating cost centers, increased capital needs. So Cape-wide, if you look at the total override requests over those same 21 years, it averages 7 requests per town. Sandwich has asked for 0. So a lot of times there's a lot of misinformation in the public about what our average tax bill is, about, that we spend more than what we have. Not true. So our Finance Committee presentation is next Tuesday, February 4th. I think it's fair to say, and I think you guys would agree, there's very minimal operating budget changes to review. We're going to focus on the increased cost centers impacting several departments, especially the big three. There's some minor additions to our FY25 and beyond implementation, and some significant future operational savings that we want to highlight between the regional dispatch and paying off our debt at Sandwich Hollows. But I think the larger discussion is probably should focus on that DPW infrastructure needs. Is there a way, once we know those other line items, what they're going to be, can we find a way to do that? And are we willing to possibly look at that levy capacity to some extent, hopefully not the full extent, to fund that? I can't stress enough the support that I've had and that Heather and I have had, not only from her, but like from Bill, to do this stuff. I mean, he had complete budgets proposed for next year to every department head before Thanksgiving. We were literally done with this presentation except for fine tuning, and it looks a lot better now than it did at the beginning of the month. But we could have presented this the first week in January, and I'm glad we waited because of what we heard about the health insurance, because we were carrying a number that was 5% less than what was given to you tonight, and we just hope it's not another 5% more. This is the third year with our new budget format, so when you get your binders, and I mean this sincerely, we've added some improvements, but if there's things you don't like or you want us to change in the future, just tell us, and we'd be glad to do it. I know we've talked a lot about electronic dissemination. I want to stress that everything that we'll go over and that we'll all be looking at the next several months will be on our website as soon as the binders are finalized. One thing we talked about internally, and Heather's going to take the lead on this, is, how can we prepare like a separate, much briefer than what I just showed you? Because I mean, personally, I feel like you and the Finance Committee need the meat and potato presentation, because like there's a lot. This is our biggest policy statement every year that the Select Board adopts, and I just thought it's important for you to know the details. But the general public probably doesn't need to know that level of detail, and so we want to do something that's more visual, like a higher level overview, focusing on some of the demographics, state and regional comparisons. So she and a group of department heads and others are already working on that. And we'll share that with you as we get it closer to being done. I also want to stress that I think we might take it for granted, like the internal teamwork that we have in cooperation between departments, and I include the school in that as well. Like there's other towns, we were just several of us were at an MMA conference late last week where, the police and fire chiefs don't even talk to each other, or, just terrible things. Like we are so fortunate to have the culture and the teamwork that we have, and I think that's one thing that we probably say we're most proud of as the central administrative team, on how everyone bands together when needed, but people are there for each other in the good times and the bad. So we really appreciate that. So again, the last slide, the base budget recommendation is general government at 3.65%. That optimal outcome goal, which is purely just the DPW public infrastructure, would get us to 6.05. Before I ask about any questions, I would just want Bill and Heather to be able to add whatever they'd like to.
Thank you, Bud. I think I'll just touch on the health insurance. Generally how it works is we have a representative from Maya who gives me an estimate, usually in like mid to late November, of what our rates are going to be. I did receive that estimate. I use that to essentially build our FY26 billing rates, and then I put that up against our census, so what we currently have enrolled in health insurance. What happened this year is that we found out that the estimate, and we only found out this late last week, is when Bud and Heather were up at the MMA conference, was that estimate was going to be wrong. It was going to be too low, and so I hate coming here tonight and not having a binder ready for you and not having this on the town website tomorrow. But, unfortunately, like that number could be impactful. both in a negative and hopefully a positive way. So I think the last thing we wanted to do was present a budget out there that's going to have to most likely have some changes. Hopefully not significant, but so I don't think we wanted to have any of that information out there until we know it's good to go. Unfortunately, I think, we've been waiting all week, as Bud has mentioned. I've had my phone on beep beep, so I can look at it in case it comes in, so we get ready to go. Unfortunately, I don't know when that email is going to come in. That generally comes into myself and Marie Buckner, our HR director. I hope it comes tomorrow morning, but it might be next Thursday. It might be next Friday. I honestly don't know. I can tell you that, we have reached out to no avail. As Bud mentioned, they handle over 100 towns in the state. So where we are on that pecking order, I don't know. But as soon as we get that information, we'll certainly, as Bud mentioned, we're ready to go both in a up or down. We're ready to make changes. We have some ideas already. And then as soon as we have that up-to-date, accurate information, then we'll be able to really provide everything that we normally do at this time. But unfortunately, this was a curveball that happened, again, late last week at that conference. And so what we're using is just simply what's the trust average. But unfortunately, there's a big, broad range of, anywhere from 10 to 20%. And that's like, as Bud mentioned, every percent's going to be about $100,000. So if we're going to be above that range, we're going to have to make some changes. So we're prepared and ready to do it. But I apologize for the delay in the binders and the information, but we just felt it was more important to get accurate information out there when it's ready to go.
And I'd say the big difference is, we're always told, we'll let you know by mid-February. So it's not like we're getting information later than usual. It's just that most of the time, the estimate that we get in the late fall matches what we hear in, at the end of January. So we haven't had to worry as much because we know it's in the ballpark. Yeah. This time we don't know.
Thank you for everything. Heather has a comment, I believe.
Is this on? Yeah. Okay, just a couple. One, I just wanted to recognize Melissa Carroll, who is incredible. And even this presentation, we've, Bud had ready to go in multiple copies earlier in the week and made changes, and she's ready to go to make that happen for this meeting and the Finance Committee, as well as these binders. They are ready to go, and she's ready to make whatever changes need to be made, so that as soon as Bud and Bill have a recommendation for you, they'll have that in your hands. The other thing I just wanted to mention, and I really noticed it during Bud's presentation, is with the preferred or recommended budget with the public works infrastructure increases, that excess levy reserve is, I think, just about what you had projected and hoped and desired it would be after the CAL was funded. So that really is just a demonstration of the conservative approach to budgeting that the town has had in the last 4 or 5 years. To have that reserve capacity is something that is a real, tribute to the policy making in terms of budgeting, and puts you in a good shape to make a decision.
Thank you. Shane?
I just had one, a lot of the things on the, it's all important, but some of the things that we're really going to have to deal with in a short term is, most likely the wastewater issue is really becoming significant. I got an email today from the Cape and Island Realtors Association where they did a change in well fleet, where basically any house that's sold, they have to upgrade, that there's not in the sewer project, they're going to be forced to upgrade to a denitrification system. And then any building project that a building permit is pulled that is considered new construction includes renovations, exposing interior walls, or any change to the footprint of the house or room size, is also going to trigger a denitrification septic system to be installed at the property. So, that is something that's coming down the road for most municipalities in the Commonwealth, but really more so here on the Cape, because we're on the sole source aquifer, and that's, you're talking between $40,000 and $70,000 each time that's triggered. And even if you have the other thing was, even if you sell your house and you have a passing septic, Title V septic, you're going to be forced within 6 months to upgrade to a denitrification system as the new owner. And that's, inside that, just that one town, those are the rules that they're having to put in place, which is kind of scary as any homeowner would have to look at that bill. So it's something that we have to really push forward to get, resolution and pipes in the ground. It's really going to come important here in the next short future. That's all I got.
Thank you. Anybody else? Mr. Ellis?
Yes. Thank you, Bud. You're getting better at this. One thing about Sandwich is that we've had a conservative budget approach for 40 years, at least. And so it really, in my opinion, it makes sense. I think people would be better, in just boiling this down to a sentence or two, people are better served, I believe, to be able to drive on a better road every day than have $560,000 more in their excess levy capacity. I think that just is a better function of taking that money. And I think what's worthy of noting to people is that when we were listing off the list of accomplished capital projects, you also have to realize we had the hydrogen plant, the gas quick-fired plant come on, which has provided tremendous funds for these, to be able to wipe these capital projects out without debt. So people need to realize, where did that money come from? It didn't come from increased taxation. That's why it's important to bring it up, because it's that kind of creativity when the board was faced with that, and whether we had to challenge and be for it, even though EPA, the Cape Cod Commission, were all against it. So as a board, we had to brace ourselves and say, no, this is, even though it may have environmental shortfalls that other people see, for Sandwich, this was an inherently really good thing. So sometimes things like that, pay a dividend, years into the future. And that's why we have our town hall without a debt, and why we have the CAL, and why we have all these others. So with that in mind, I think that, going that additional 2.4% to go to the additional 560 and use the excess levy capacity, to my mind, would be a good move. And you need this in order to put together a pavement management program, because it's all about a predictive failure. And we already know, we can tell you when the roads will fail. So for us, it's a matter of getting there faster. It's getting there for that spackle and painting of the walls before it becomes a plastering expedition. And it's just really as simple as that. So the better we get at this, the thinner the systems we're able to use, the lower the cost per square yard. So to my mind, it's a really good thing. And it's a good strategy, because we're not taking 20% of our excess levy capacity, and we're not taking a big chunk of it. So, and I know that we may talk about this further if we get more information that's worse. That may change that. But I want to compliment you on the budget, on the transparency of this, and the ability of people to be able to look at it just like we do at home. I think it's tremendous. So thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Good.
Okay. Excellent. Thanks very much. The three of you. Thanks very much.
We'll talk about it a lot for the next 3 months.
Okay. How about old business? Town Hall renovation update, Community Preservation Act application.
I'll give Bud a little bit of a break on this one, but open it up if I miss anything. Really, the update is we've been working with a great design team, Catalyst, who was the design architect for the town hall or the municipal building renovations, their historic preservation expert, Maria Raber, has been working with us along with Pomeroy Associates on the two main issues are the window restoration project, as well as addressing some of the water intrusion issues that we're all familiar with on the roof line and the portico. We spent the better part of the summer and fall doing a lot of investigation, including thermal imaging. A couple of times she had lifts rented to have the physical inspections. So I think we feel pretty confident that the work that she's done and her team has done to identify the scope of any, imminent threats to the exterior of the building have been thoroughly vetted. We had thought, given what our experience has been in construction pricing, that we would be looking at a price tag that's double what the cost estimate came in at. So you have a draft version. It's actually been updated. We expect the total cost to replace with appropriate custom-made Marvin windows, as well as all of the exterior repairs that we can see and know that are necessary. And of course, when we took a look inside, some of the construction methods weren't what we thought they would be, or maybe didn't have the appropriate weatherproofing. So there's some things that we know of now that we didn't know before, but that cost is looking to be about $2.4 million. A project of that scope, we had originally thought, anticipating what the cost might be, this would be a project we should phase, that we should fund the first phase, get that work done, do the planning for the second phase, go out to bid again, mobilize, and do the second phase. When you're looking at a scope of $2.4 million, it certainly isn't a level that we should propose bonding for. It just isn't at the right magnitude for that financing. And we took a look at the project and really felt like it was in the best interest of the building to have one mobilization effort, one general contractor, having that oversight when the building's open, to have one set of construction documents and one general contractor involved in that. And so in looking what we had for available funding, you recall we appropriated $1.42 million 2 town meetings ago, I think it was May. And we sought a grant from the Mass Cultural Facilities Fund and were awarded $200,000. We have a little over $1.2 million. And in talking with the staff in the Community Development Department, with Leanne, and internally, and again, all this information came to us last week on the 21st of January. We said we should make a run at the Community Preservation Fund. And this building is I would say the most important building in Sandwich, and maybe the most important historic building in the region. And it really is an icon of governance. And has just such a great function now with the cultural facilities on the lower level. So we are going to do that. The application that you have here says $1 million. We actually are going to ask them for the $1.2 million to get us up over 2.4. And the difference between what you have in your packet is the original specifications included, probably used the wrong word, but the sashing around the windows to be a pine product, and the architect is recommending mahogany for a longer life. And so we felt it was important to put that forward as part of the cost. And so the cost escalated to support that feature. But it would take care of all of the windows and everything that we know of. The building is not going to look any different to folks. You might know that the windows are perhaps a little clearer to see through, but it should be a reproduction level effort. Of course, we'll have to see the historic committee and get the district committee for those approvals. In fact, I think the application process has started for that already. A project that's over is at $50,000. That's a town project, requires the board to review. We wanted to give you an opportunity to take a look at it and gain your support. And if so, we'll be meeting with the CPA on Monday evening at 5:30. Anything else?
Make a recommendation for the 1.2. Liz?
Make a motion, we approve for the May, approve that we, 1,042,000 for the renovations.
Second.
Motion by Mr. George, second by Mr. Hockner. All those in favor?
Aye.
I said, so that was a summary of what we already had. So we had the $1,042,000 plus the $200,000 grant
Right.
Heather was able to get for the town, and then so we need another 1.2. So if we could support an application for 1.2. In addition, that's what we were looking for.
It's the bottom half of that number.
Right, the application
I read
to
that.
the CPA. Bob, I'm sorry. I didn't direct you properly.
Yep. So we gotta go for the CPA funds?
Yes.
Is that CPA funds, is that 1 million?
Right, we're authorizing the town to make that application. Yes.
Make the application for the CPA funds of 1 million.
1.2,
1.2,
yes.
1.2 million.
Second.
Motion by Mr. George as amended, second by Mr. Hockner as amended. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Unanimous.
I just want to note that in your packet are the design documents that were prepared, very thorough, so we feel confident, fingers crossed, that we've got a good cost estimate.
Yeah, it's a really good package. It's well done.
I just want to stress what Heather said. When we got this back, we were dumbfounded. We thought it was going to be 2-3 times that. And when we heard what it was, and that if you look at the total estimate, like half the project cost is to replace the windows. I would just encourage anyone who has a question from the public, because the building's open, a lot of meetings every night, like just come look at the windows up close and try to lift them, look at the gaps, look at this. I mean, look at the size of those things. It's a huge accomplishment if we could replace them. And I think as Patrick and Heather pointed out, like if you see what's just gone in at the wing school, it is beautiful. It's impressive.
Just a historical footnote that when we did the original preservation project and design in 2010, constructed in 2011, we purposefully avoided the windows. We knew that was a huge liability, but we were able to paint them, get them to work, function for the last 13, 14 years. So that was a good move. But we didn't do a lot at that time. We re-roofed the building, but we didn't do a lot with the envelope. And there are real problems with these windows in that they don't have splines that go behind the trim to keep weather out. So they let a lot of water into the building during storm events that won't be that way once we replace them with. And the windows today, the window industry's done a tremendous, for these to have been replaced 25 years ago, it would have been almost impossible. But the window industry's done a really good job with composites, and anyone who wants to see what the result may be, just take a look at the wing school, because the windows are in on the old 27 building, and the building just looks fabulous.
It does.
So, thank you.
And the one project concept is important as well. Keep moving.
Good idea. That's a good idea.
Okay. Other matters not reasonably anticipated by the chairman. I have none under old business. So, new business. In person, early voting for the May 8th annual town election at the town clerk's office, April 28th, 2025 to May 2nd, 2025.
Make a motion, we approve the in-person early voting for May 8th, 2025 annual town election as recommended by the town clerk as presented.
Second.
Motion by Mr. George, second by Mr. Hockner. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, it's unanimous. Recommended Conservation Commission, a full appointment to Tyler Goodrow, There's a letter in our packet, I believe, that endorses Mr. Goodrow. From the Conservation Commission. I looked at it, I was fine with that. Does anybody have any other thoughts? No. Okay.
Make a motion, we appoint Tyler Goodrow to the Conservation Commission as a full member to fulfill an unexpired term ending on June 30th, 2025.
Second.
Motion by Mr. George, second by Mr. Hockter. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, it's unanimous. Okay. Accept fourth quarter donations as we have in our packet. And these donations came from the individual departments as listed. You think we need to read these all, or?
No.
Gosh, thank you.
Jeez.
But the total is $27,675.45 from various departments, from Council on Aging to the Police Department, to the Library, to Historic, and there's a miscellaneous amount as well from Shoreham Heights donations.
Okay. Make a motion, we accept the fourth quarter 2024 donations as presented.
Second.
Motion by Mr. George, second by Mr. Hockter. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Other matters not reasonably anticipated by the chairman. I have none at this point. Okay. Anybody here for public comment? No public comment. Closing remarks. Patrick?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to take a minute and thank Candace Thompson and the Enterprise and Taylor for their editorial last week on the sewering issue. It's really important, if you look at our future and look at what is our greatest uncertainty, as we're sailing through the fiscal waters, it's sewering. It's the unknown cost of sewering that's the greatest thing. So to have an article like that where it's talked about casually as part of it being part of where we are is really important, and this is why local papers and newspapers in general serve such a vital role in delivering that to the people. So I wanted to thank you because I was really impressed with it. Thank you.
Well done, Mr. Ellis. Thank you. Anybody else for a closing remark? Please maintain those under attack in Eastern Europe, the conflict in the Middle East, the overall threats to world peace, as well as those that continue to be affected by natural emergencies in our thoughts and prayers. Motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Motion to adjourn by Mr. George, second by Mr. Hockter. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, it's unanimous. Our next meeting is Thursday, February 6th, 2025, at 7 p.m. here in Historic Town Hall. Have a good evening, everyone.